I was standing in the fitting room with my wedding dress pulled around my ankles when my phone buzzed. It was Mom. Her voice was sharp and cold, like ice cracking. "The wedding is off," she said. "Your sister needs us more. You will understand." Then she hung up. I stared at my reflection, my face pale against the white silk. "My name is Leah," and that was the moment my mother broke my wedding day in half. I called her back, but she didn't answer. My fiancé, Colin, texted me next, saying he'd just heard too and was racing over. Fear pressed on my chest. Mom had always compared me to my sister, Ivy, like life was a contest neither of us asked to join. Ivy was the fragile one. I was the strong one. At least that was how Mom told it. But lately, there had been something darker in her eyes when she looked at me. Something like anger at my happiness. I didn't yet know she had already taken my wedding day and turned it into something else entirely. The day everyone gathered, not to watch me begin a new life, but to say goodbye to Ivy forever. Colin arrived breathless, eyes darting across the dress, the mirrors, and my shaking hands. "We'll fix this," he said softly, but even he sounded unsure. My phone finally rang again. It was Dad. His voice was heavy, older than I had ever heard. "Come home," he said. "Now." He didn't explain anything, and that silence scared me more than words could. We drove in silence. My heart hammered with questions. Was Ivy hurt? Was she in the hospital again? She had struggled with a long illness that rose and fell like tides, and Mom wrapped herself around Ivy like armor. I loved my sister, but Mom loved her in a way that left no space for anyone else. When we reached the house, neighbors' cars lined the street. The porch light glowed even though it was still afternoon. The air felt wrong. Mom stood inside the doorway with red-rimmed eyes, not looking at me, only at the people behind her. "The funeral will be Saturday," she said flatly. "The same day you planned your wedding." I swayed, grabbing the wall. My wedding day had been replaced. My mother had chosen which daughter mattered more, and she had not chosen me. I walked past her into the living room. Ivy's photo sat on the table, surrounded by flowers and candles, as if the house itself was holding its breath. My chest tightened. Ivy had been sick for months, but the doctors said there was time. Time to try new treatments. Time to hope. Mom stepped closer. "It's better this way," she said. "Your wedding would only confuse things. People need to focus on Ivy now." Focus. That was what she wanted. Attention. Control. Even while grief throbbed inside me, I felt a different pain twist there too. The knowledge that part of her almost seemed satisfied. Colin squeezed my hand, but Mom barely glanced at him. "You should cancel everything," she continued, already moving past me, giving orders to relatives like a commander. She had not hugged me. She had not even said she was sorry. I stood staring at Ivy's picture, remembering laughter in our shared room when we were young, whispered secrets, fights over borrowed clothes, the promise we once made to always protect each other. I whispered, "I'm sorry I wasn't here," though I didn't even know yet how it had happened. No one had told me the details, only the result. My sister was gone, and my mother had taken my wedding with her. We sat together that night, the house full of murmurs and footsteps and the clink of teacups. Still no one had told me exactly what happened. Whenever I asked, Mom said, "It doesn't matter now." But it mattered to me. I went to Dad. He sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at his hands. "Tell me," I said. His eyes filled, and for the first time in my life I saw him break. He explained how Ivy's condition had worsened without warning, how Mom had been with her, how they rushed to the hospital, but it was already too late. My throat tightened until air hurt. Dad squeezed my shoulder. "Your mother is not handling it well." That was an understatement. Mom moved through the rooms like she owned the air, correcting people, deciding everything, pushing me aside as if my grief did not belong here. When I tried to speak about my wedding, she snapped, "How dare you bring that up today?" But it was not just the wedding. It was my life she had swept away with one phone call. And deep beneath the grief lay something else I didn't want to name yet. The sense that Mom had been waiting for a moment like this, where my joy could finally be erased. The next morning, Mom gathered everyone in the living room. She had color-coded lists, schedules, and a look of fierce control. She pointed at me. "You will call your guests and tell them the wedding is canceled." Not postponed. Canceled. The word hit like ice water. "We can move it," I said quietly. "Another weekend. Ivy would have wanted." "Don't you dare say what Ivy would have wanted," she snapped. Her voice cut the room in half. "Your wedding would be a distraction. This family will be united around one thing only." I felt people watching me, pitying me, but no one spoke. Even Dad stayed silent. Colin stepped forward. "With respect, we can grieve and still keep our future. That doesn't dishonor anyone." Mom's gaze hardened. "You are not family yet," she said. "This is not your decision." Shame and anger flushed my face. It was clear. She was not just lost in grief. She was choosing this, choosing to erase my day, my plans, my voice. And the terrible truth slid into me like a blade. Mom had always been jealous of how my life was opening while hers was closing. Now she had found a way to shut my future down completely, and she was calling it love. I went upstairs to my old room and closed the door. The house noise drifted through the walls, but in here it felt quiet and trapped, like time had stopped. Ivy's side of the room still looked the same as when we were teens, though she had moved out years ago. Little notes, ribbons, old photos. I sat on the bed and finally cried, not loud, just steady tears that soaked my hands. I was grieving two things at once, and it hurt in ways I could not even name. I cried for Ivy, my sister who should have grown old with me. I cried for my wedding, for the life I had been ready to begin. But under the tears there was another feeling I hated, anger at Mom. Not anger for being sad, but for using sadness like a weapon. She did not ask me to delay the wedding. She announced it was gone. She did not comfort me as a daughter who had lost a sister. She acted like my grief was selfish. When I heard footsteps in the hall, I wiped my face. I knew this was only the beginning. Mom was building something out of this tragedy, and I was terrified of what part she wanted me to play. That evening, Colin and I sat on the back steps while the sky faded into blue and gold. He held my hand without saying much at first, letting the silence breathe. Finally, he said, "We can still get married later. Your mother doesn't control that." His voice was gentle, but sure. I leaned my head on his shoulder. "She will make me the villain if I try," I whispered. "She already acts like my wedding is an insult to Ivy." He sighed. "Grief changes people, but it doesn't give them the right to destroy your life." His words warmed me, but fear still curled inside. Inside the house, I heard Mom's voice carrying, giving orders again, planning songs, flowers, speeches. She spoke of Ivy as if she belonged to her alone. I realized then what Mom truly wanted, a stage, a grand story of the perfect mother who had given everything to one daughter and refused to let joy exist beside sorrow. She needed all eyes on her, and my wedding had been in her way. Colin squeezed my fingers. "Whatever happens, I'm not leaving," he said. I believed him, but I also knew Mom would not stop pushing until something finally broke. The next morning, I went with Dad to the funeral home. Mom insisted on staying back to coordinate guests, which really meant control more things. The air in the funeral home smelled like old paper and polish. The director spoke softly, going over details. Dad nodded, but his hands shook. I answered questions when he couldn't. I felt older than I was, as if the last 2 days had stretched me thin. On one form, the date struck me hard. The service would be held at the exact hour my wedding had been planned. My throat tightened. This wasn't coincidence. This was replacement. My day had been lifted out like a page torn from a book, and Ivy's farewell slipped into the space. I loved my sister. I would have given her anything, but I could not shake the truth beating in my chest. Mom did not merely choose a date. She erased mine. On the drive back, Dad said quietly, "Your mother, she can't stand losing control." I glanced at him. It was the first time he had ever spoken against her. He added, "I should have protected both of you better." I didn't answer. I just looked out the window and wondered how long Mom's jealousy had been growing unnoticed in our house. Relatives filled the house over the next 2 days. They hugged me, whispered, "Be strong," and then hurried to help Mom with plans. No one mentioned the wedding except in soft sideways, looks that burned my skin. Mom moved like a storm cloud, dark and heavy, sweeping every room. She corrected flowers, clothes, even people's tears. When I tried to help, she brushed me away. "You've already taken enough," she said under her breath, not loud enough for others to hear, but sharp enough for me to feel. Taken enough. The words echoed inside me. What had I taken? A chance at happiness? A spotlight she wanted? That night, I found an old box of letters Ivy had written me while she was in treatment. In one, she had written, "Promise me you will still live your life, even if mine gets small. Someone should get everything we dreamed of." My hands trembled as I read. Ivy had not wanted my world to stop for hers. She had loved my joy. The truth was clear as glass. Mom was acting in her name, but not in her heart. I folded the letter and placed it close to mine. For the first time since this began, my grief held a thread of strength. The day of the service arrived, gray and heavy, like the sky itself knew what was happening. I dressed in black, while my mind flashed back to white fabric and soft lace. 2 worlds, one erased for the other. At the church, people filled the pews. I walked down the same aisle I had imagined for my wedding. But instead of flowers and music, there was quiet and the smell of candles. Mom sat in the front row, shoulders straight, eyes dry as if tears were beneath her. When she spoke, it was not as a grieving mother, but as a queen addressing subjects. She talked about sacrifice, devotion, about how she had given everything for Ivy and how nothing else mattered. Her eyes flicked to me, just for a heartbeat, and I understood the message inside her words. My life should also be an offering. I held Ivy's letter in my pocket like armor. When it was my turn to speak, my voice shook but did not break. I talked about Ivy's laugh, her jokes, her dreams, and the promise she had written to me. That life must go on. Mom stiffened. The room listened. In that moment, I felt something shift. My mother had taken my wedding day, but she would not take my future. After the service, people surrounded my mother. They praised her strength, her speeches, her planning. She soaked in every word like sunlight. I stood to the side near a window, feeling both seen and invisible at the same time. Colin joined me and slipped his hand into mine. "You spoke for your sister," he whispered. "Not for your mother." That mattered. I nodded, but my chest still felt tight. Mom kept glancing at me as if checking whether I would misbehave in her story. When most people left, she finally walked toward me. Her voice was low, smooth, sharp underneath. "You tried to make today about yourself," she said. "Even now." I stared at her, shocked. "I talked about Ivy," I replied. "About what she wanted." Mom's eyes hardened. "Your wedding will not happen. Not this year. Maybe not ever. There should be no joy after this." I realized then she was not only grieving. She wanted my life to freeze beside hers as proof of her pain. She wanted my love to stay chained next to her sorrow. That night, I lay awake hearing her words again. Something inside me stopped obeying. I loved my mother, but I could not belong to her anymore. Days turned into weeks, but inside the house time stayed stuck. Mom kept Ivy's room exactly the same. She walked in and out of it like a museum guard, touching things, arranging them, sighing loudly so everyone heard. She made grief into a performance. Every time I mentioned work or plans, she looked hurt, like I had insulted her. She never asked how I was doing. She never said Ivy's name softly, only like a tool. One afternoon, I found Dad sitting alone at the kitchen table, turning his ring around his finger. Your mother has built a shrine, he said quietly. Not just in that room. In her heart. I sat across from him. She wants me to give up my life, I said. He nodded slowly. She is afraid to be the only one left moving forward. His words made sense, but they did not excuse what she had done. Grief did not give her the right to take everything from me. That evening, I told Colin I needed time to think, not about us, but about how to live without being trapped. He listened, patient as always. Whatever you choose, he said, choose for you. Not against her. For you. For the first time, that idea felt real. I started writing letters to Ivy in a notebook. I wrote about small things like the weather and big things like the ache in my chest. Writing made me feel close to her without Mom's shadow blocking the light. One night, I wrote about the wedding dress, still hanging in its bag. I confessed how guilty I felt wanting my life back. And then I remembered Ivy's letter again. Promise me you will still live your life. It was like she was answering. The next morning, I went to the closet and unzipped the dress bag. The soft, white fabric glowed in the dim light. I did not cry this time. I smiled sadly. You will still be worn, I whispered. Not today. Not here. But someday. When Mom walked past the open door and saw me touching the dress, her face darkened. Put that away, she snapped. It is disrespectful. I turned to her slowly. It's not disrespectful to be alive, I said. She stared at me as if she did not recognize me. Maybe she didn't. I was not the quiet daughter who obeyed without question anymore. Something in her gaze flickered, not just anger but fear. She could feel me slipping out of her control. The breaking point came a week later. Mom gathered the family in the living room. Her tone was serious, as if she were announcing a rule instead of sharing grief. From now on, she said, there will be no celebrations in this house. No parties. No wedding talk. No happiness that makes this loss feel smaller. My heart pounded. She was not only stopping my wedding. She wanted to ban joy itself. Dad opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked tired, worn thin by walking between us. I stood up. My voice surprised me with how steady it sounded. You cannot control how people heal, I said. Mom's eyes burned into mine. You are selfish, she replied. Your sister is gone forever, and you still think about ceremonies and dresses. I took a breath. I think about living, I said. I think about what Ivy wanted for me. I reached into my pocket and held up Ivy's letter. She asked me to keep going. You are the one who refuses. The room went silent. Mom's face went pale, then red. She turned away without a word and walked upstairs. A door slammed. I sat down, shaking but also lighter. The war had finally been spoken aloud. Mom stopped speaking to me after that. She moved around the house with stiff steps and tight lips, talking over me, never to me. I tried to reach her, but she pushed me away with cold silence instead of words. Strangely, that hurt less than her sharp ones. Dad, on the other hand, grew closer. We talked late at night in the kitchen, the clock ticking softly above us. He told me stories from before we were born, about how Mom had always needed to be the center of every room. She loved being depended on, he said. She doesn't know who she is without someone to rescue. Ivy had needed saving. I had not. That truth sat heavy between us. One evening, Colin came over and cooked dinner while Dad laughed quietly for the first time in weeks. I realized then that healing does not wait for permission. It grows where it can. When Colin left that night, he kissed my forehead. When you're ready, he said softly, we will find our day again. I watched his car lights fade down the street and felt a calm promise inside myself. My life would not end in this house of frozen time. I would walk forward, even if I had to do it without my mother beside me. A few days later, my aunt invited us to a family dinner to bring everyone together. I went mostly for Dad. Mom arrived late and sat across from me, acting as if I were air. Everyone spoke in soft voices, like sound itself might break her. When dessert came, She finally looked at me. "Have you told people you are canceling the wedding forever?" she asked, loud enough for the room to hear. The table went silent. All forks stopped. I felt heat rise in my face but kept my voice calm. "No," I said. "I have not." A cousin tried to change the subject, but Mom leaned forward. "You should," she said. "Anything else would be shameful." The word shameful cut like glass. I thought of Ivy's letter. I thought of Colin's steady hand. I thought of the aisle that had become a funeral path. "I will not give up my life to prove my love for you," I said. My voice shook, but the words stood firm. Mom pushed back her chair and left the room. I heard the door close hard behind her. The rest of the table exhaled at once. For the first time, no one chased after her. Something in the family had shifted, and everyone felt it. The next morning, Mom was gone when I woke up. A note sat on the kitchen counter in her tight handwriting. "I need time. Do not call." That was all. No love. No name. Just control even in leaving. Dad stared at the note for a long time, then folded it. "Let her go," he said softly. We spent that day in quiet work, cleaning the house room by room. When we reached Ivy's room, I paused. "Can we?" I asked. Dad nodded. We did not erase her. We honored her. We folded clothes gently, packed some things, left the parts that truly felt like her. We opened the window. Fresh air slipped in, like the room could breathe again. I whispered, "I miss you," and for the first time the words did not break me. They warmed me. That night, Colin called. "Your mother left," he said gently, already knowing from Dad. "How do you feel?" I searched myself. Sad, I said, but also lighter. There was silence, then his warm reply. "That makes sense." Before bed, I wrote another letter to Ivy. I told her that I was trying to live in a way she would be proud of. I felt, in a quiet way, that she already knew. Weeks passed. Mom stayed away. She sent short messages, only to Dad about bills, not feelings. The house slowly changed. Laughter began to return in small pieces, like shy birds coming back to a yard. Dad and I cooked together. I went back to work part-time. I saw Colin more. We did not talk about dates yet, only about us. One evening, Dad handed me an envelope. "Your mother mailed this to you," he said. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single page. Her words were stiff at first, then softer near the end. She wrote that when Ivy died, it felt like the world had ended and she wanted every other world to end with it, so she wouldn't feel alone. She admitted she was angry that my life had lightened it when hers felt dark. She did not say, "I'm sorry" in big letters, but she wrote, "I was wrong to make your life stop." I read it twice. I cried, not like before, but with slow tears that came from release. I did not answer right away. Healing is not a switch. It is a path. But for the first time, the path between us was not completely blocked anymore. I met Mom at a small park the next afternoon. The air was cool, and leaves moved softly above us. She looked different, smaller somehow, like someone who had finally put down a heavy bag. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "I heard your voice at the funeral again. It frightened me because you were strong, and I was afraid to be left behind." I listened. She twisted her ring the way Dad did when he was nervous. "I love the attention," she added, almost whispering. "People caring, calling, coming. When it slowed, I felt empty. I tried to hold on to it by stopping your joy. That was wrong." Hearing the word wrong felt like air entering a locked room. I nodded slowly. "I loved Ivy," I said, "but I still love my life. Those things do not fight each other." She looked at me with wet eyes. "I don't know how to move forward," she said, "but I want to try." We did not hug right away. We sat on the bench, side by side, like two people learning how to speak again. It was not perfect. It was honest, and that was more than we had before. That night, I took the wedding dress out again. This time I brought it downstairs. Dad smiled when he saw it, a tired but happy smile. "It suits you," he said. Mom came by later and stopped in the doorway. She didn't snap or scold. She just looked at it for a long moment and whispered, "It is beautiful." Her voice cracked on the last word. I nodded. "Yes," I replied. "It is." We all stood there in quiet, 3 people who had traveled through fire and were still standing. After Mom went upstairs, Dad said, "You should choose your day when you're ready. Not for or against anyone. Just ready." I held the dress close and felt peace settle into me. Not loud or bright, just steady. Before sleep, I whispered, "Good night, Ivy," into the dark. The grief was still there, but it was no longer a chain. It was something I carried with love, not fear. I dreamed that night of open doors and clear skies, of walking forward without looking back every step. A few weekends later, Colin and I walked by the lake. The water was calm, and the path was bright with sunlight. We talked about simple things at first, like food and work and funny stories. Finally he stopped, turned to me, and said, "Leah, I want to ask again. Not to rush you, just to tell you my heart." He took my hands. "Will you marry me when you are ready?" I felt tears fill my eyes, not from sadness, but from fullness. I nodded. "Yes," I said softly, "when I am ready." We both laughed a little at how serious we sounded, then sat on a bench and watched the water. There was no big crowd, no music, just us and a quiet promise. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel like I was betraying my sister. I felt like I was honoring her words. On the way home, I thought of how life can hold 2 things at once, loss and hope, goodbye and hello. And I understood something simple and strong. My story did not end on my cancelled wedding day. It bent. Then it kept going. When Mom came over for dinner the next week, she brought flowers. Not the dramatic funeral kind, just bright little ones in a small glass jar. "For the table," she said shyly. We cooked together, bumping into each other in the kitchen like strangers learning a new dance. After we ate, she cleared her throat. "I would like to come to your wedding one day," she said, "as your mother, not as someone who wants the stage." I searched her face. She was trying, really trying. "Then learn with me," I said gently. "Learn how to share light instead of taking all of it." She nodded, tears forming. "I will fall sometimes," she said. "I might slip back." "Then stand up again," I replied. We sat long after the plates were washed, talking about Ivy in the way she deserved to be remembered. With laughter, with stories, with quiet love. Not as a tool, not as a wall, as our sister and daughter. Mom touched the letter Ivy had written me and smiled through tears. "She was wiser than both of us," she whispered. I smiled too. She was right. We chose a small date in late spring. Not the old one, a new one. The air was soft, the trees a gentle green. We kept it simple, close, warm. I invited Mom, Dad, a few friends, and some of Ivy's closest people. Before getting dressed, I sat alone for a while and spoke to Ivy in my heart. "You're with me," I said, "not in the way I once wanted, but in the way that matters." I could almost hear her laugh, that light sound that used to fill rooms. When I walked down the aisle this time, it was not the place that had once held her final goodbye. It was somewhere different, fresh, full of light. Mom cried openly, not the stage tears from before, but real ones that came and went like waves. Colin's eyes were soft and steady. When we said our vows, I felt both grounded and free at the same time. I did not forget my sister for 1 second. I carried her with me, right beside my heart, exactly where she belonged. At the small reception after, Mom took my hands. "Thank you for not giving up on life," she said, "even when I asked you to." I squeezed her fingers. "Thank you for trying to find your way back," I replied. We stood near the open doors, sunlight pouring in. Dad joined us, his smile wide and honest. For a moment, the 3 of us simply existed together without anger, without roles, just as people who had been hurt and were healing. Later, when I danced with Dad, he whispered, "She is proud of you." Both of them are in their own ways. I knew what he meant. Mom, still learning. Ivy, still with us in memory. I felt no more tug of guilt, only the deep sense that I had stepped through something dark and not lost myself. When the music slowed, I looked around the room. It wasn't grand or perfect. It was real, and real is what lasts. Sometimes, late at night, I think back to the day it all cracked open. The call in the fitting room, the canceled wedding, the funeral that took its place. For a long time, that memory burned. Now it glows gently, like a candle instead of a wildfire. I see the girl I was then, standing in white, stunned and silent. I wish I could reach back and tell her, "You will not break. You will bend and grow." My mother's jealousy had tried to trap me, but it also forced truths into the light. I learned that love does not mean stopping your life for someone else's grief. I learned that saying no can be an act of care for yourself. And I learned that goodbyes do not erase beginnings. My sister's final goodbye happened on the day that was meant to be my wedding, but it did not steal my future. It changed its shape. Today I live, not perfectly but fully. I laugh without fear. I cry without shame. And every step I take forward carries both my own name and Ivy's, side by side, like two hands held in the same heart.